tell you that we will be doing this here the first and third Tuesdays at 6:30 from January through April. Just January 18th, Sheriff Babcock will be here to be interviewed by me to talk about Chautauqua Institution, what was going on behind the curtain. And she thinks there's enough things that have happened over time, and now she can talk about it. So that's all good. And you'll also learn, for those that are able to be here, about Jim Babcock and his relationship to the Jackson Center, and that story you've never heard. After that, on February 1st, we're going to have Arthur Stewart. Arthur Stewart is very active in the lobbying throughout Pennsylvania, really, and Ohio, dealing with natural gas and dealing with fracking and perhaps some of the misconceptions or conceptions of it all. It's a very balanced approach. And then on this February 15th, Dennis Elsenbeck, who is one of only eight chair people of the New York State, newly appointed New York State Energy Council, and they are sending out a position paper on what the strategy is of the energy for New York State, and Dennis is one of those 8, and he'll be here on the 15th, and then we'll fill out the card later on. I'm delighted this is, and Maureen may talk about this more, but this is our 17th year doing this, and we've done it mostly at Turner School. And as a result of really an inquiry 17 years ago by Don and Kathy Greenhouse and Bob and Sally McClure, convincing me that I should do this during the winter months. And we spent a few years on the Nuremberg trial and its history during one of its anniversary cycles, and the rest you can see on YouTube. So we're delighted that we can finally get together here. Last year was all virtual with programming. So it was a delight. So without any further ado, I'm going to invite Maureen to come up, and Maureen to do a little introduction, but I also have a presentation for her, and probably an assignment. Come on up, Maureen. All right, I'll explain this. And this is
a surprise.
This is a book called The Short History of the Early Church by John R. Hurst. You may have heard of Hurst Avenue, among other Hursts. And this is a Chautauqua Press, and this is copyrighted 1886, A Short History of the Early Church. And if you could read it and report on it, that would be terrific.
I get an annual assignment.
Yes,
thank you very much. I do look forward to these assignments. So thank you, Greg, and hello and welcome all you dear friends. As we begin, as Greg said, this 17th year of the Turner Winter Series. And I'm grateful to add my welcome to Greg's welcome. Greg being the founder and the perennial host of the Turner Winter Series these many years. And we do welcome with delight those of you who are with us this evening in the socially distancing comfort of the Kappa Theater here in the Robert H. Jackson Center, as well as those who will enjoy this program virtually. It is my great pleasure to begin our conversation with a brief introduction of our guest, Randall Perry, after which I will turn the conversation over to our, as I said, perennial host and the founder of the series, Jamestown's and the Jackson Center's own Greg Peterson. Randall Perry is the executive director of the Chautauqua Lake and Watershed Management Alliance. He works on a variety of lake, watershed, and research initiatives in partnership with Alliance members and other stakeholders aimed at protecting and enhancing the health and usability of our Chautauqua Lake. Prior to beginning his tenure as the executive director in late 2020, he had worked as the Alliance's project manager since 2016. Before joining the Alliance, he served as an adjunct instructor at Fredonia State University of New York, teaching geoscience and environmental processes and environmental assessment. Before that, he worked as a geological consultant, specializing in environmental and water resources projects. Randall is a native of Maine, where he earned his bachelor and master degrees in earth science from the University of Maine, with a focus on environmental geochemistry. And so, with that really wonderful history that you bring with you, Randall, it is now my great pleasure to welcome Randall Perry and Greg Peterson. Greg? Randall?
Thank you for doing this. You did it last year, and you delighted you did not say no again when we asked, because here we're talking about a lot that you had hoped to have accomplished last year to see how well, it's sort of a report card on the Chautauqua Lake Alliance. But for the camera, since we are filming this, you know, you are the Chautauqua Lake and Watershed Management Alliance, which is really kind of two concepts, the lake and the watershed. Maybe a little bit of history of how you got to where that organization is today, a little bit of a corporate history.
Sure. Certainly not to nitpick, but, you know, when you think about a lake, the watershed and the lake, you know, really function as one system. So we, while we have subcategories, it's definitely both together that function together, and the manifestations of the watershed within the lake is really important and instrumental in kind of what we do. Organizationally, the Chautauqua Lake Watershed Management Alliance, we were formed in late 2014, and we really started operations in early 2015. The Chautauqua Lake Management Commission was a very successful, very important precursor to the Alliance. It was a commission formed under the county, and at the conclusion of its efforts in 2014, it was determined that a not-for-profit organization capable of, you know, sort of taking the operations to the next step was formed, and the Alliance was created. Our first executive director was put in position. At that point, our board of directors came on board, transitioning from a temporary to a full-time board of directors, or permanent board of directors. And really, early 2015 hit the ground running with securing several large grants from New York State to perform watershed projects on some of the stream bank areas and the tributaries feeding Chautauqua Lake. And those projects really got underway in 2016. I was staff member number 2, and since then we've really been fortunate to work on a lot of very important projects, very interesting projects, but you know, probably chief among that is really building the membership concept of the Alliance. So we're an alliance of members. We're a member organization. We have a variety of stakeholders who participate in and support the Alliance, performing projects both on the lake and in the watershed. Too numerous to name, but certainly our website and our other documents that are available. You know, we've got a broad array of stakeholders who served as our founding members, and many of whom still serve as active members.
The genesis of this organization came from a county initiative. Is that correct? Way back when, which subsequently morphed into what you are today?
I think a lot of it was spearheaded by the county, but I think when you look at the names and the organizations that were all part of either the Lake Commission prior to the Alliance or the Alliance moving forward, and certainly those who were instrumental in bringing the Alliance to fruition, you know, they represented more than just a governmental side, but certainly needing that structure, that framework. The County of Chautauqua was hugely important in driving this
But
initiative.
today, when we talk about your organization that you're the executive director of, it's not a division of the county, it's a separate not-for-profit tax-exempt organization.
That's correct. The county is one of our founding members and continues to be one of our very active and very important members, as well as providing funding for a lot of the projects that we might talk about tonight. So.
Well, I deal with this constantly as a counsel for the County of Chautauqua Industrial Development Agency, with the fact that even though we have a name Chautauqua in it, we're not a part of it. We're not a part of the county. We get support from the county in various ways, but we're not a subsidiary. We're not part of that, as are you. You're just an independent, not-for-profit organization with members.
That's correct.
And how does one become a member? Is it defined in your charter, or do you actually have members who, I know a lot of municipalities, they sort of submit their request and you say yea or nay?
We have bylaws that really form, the framework for the membership. The founding members that were identified at the initiation of the alliance, that included the 9 municipalities that surround Chautauqua Lake, Chautauqua Institution, the County of Chautauqua, several other either governmental or non-governmental organizations. So the founding members are outlined in our bylaws. We have a process by which new members could be added, but to date, those founding members have really continued to serve as the core group of currently active members as well. So while we have protocols in place for introducing new members, I think what it does is it speaks to the wonderful job that was done in these formative years of visualizing and then implementing this group as a member organization.
So I'm going to just kind of briefly, this is not complete, but Bemis Point, Sauron, Lakewood, Mayville, Jamestown Board of Public Utilities, Chautauqua Watershed Conservancy, Chautauqua Lake Association, Chautauqua Lake Partnership, Audubon, Roger Torrey Peterson, Chautauqua Lake Fishing Association, and North Chautauqua Lake Sewer District, Chautauqua Institution, Board of Realtors, Visitors Bureau, towns of Busti, Chautauqua, Ellery, Ellicott, North Harmony, the County of Chautauqua, South Center Sewer District. And I'm sure I missed a few there, but that gives you a sense of the members there. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's really meant to be a broad cross-section of both governmental and non-governmental entities that have a stake in the lake and the watershed and therefore, provide the best basis for managing it.
And the stake really is to have, for the municipalities that are contiguous to the lake, those municipalities are logical stakeholders, and of course others that are draw from that as a practical matter. Can you speak a little bit, because again, this is education time, the lake itself as a geographical body, just how big is the lake and sort of its dimensions, and perhaps speak a little bit to the taxing power of draw to the lake, assessments and maybe that aspect of it.
Sure. So the lake is approximately 13,000 acres in size. The lake itself is separated generally into a north basin and a south basin connected by a narrow section in the Bemis Stowe area. The watershed is about 100,000 acres, so in terms of watershed to lake size, it's an interesting sort of configuration in terms of big watershed, but also a big lake that expands north to south or northwest to southeast, trending quite a lot of the watershed. So some lakes you may have they sit at the bottom and it's everything else, but Chautauqua was really interesting in that it really spans the entire breadth of the watershed. So that north and south basin, the north basin is a little bit bigger, about 7,000 acres compared to about 6,000 in the south, but basically they're both very large basins. They could be lakes in, compared to a lot of the lakes around the state or the region. Either basin on its own would be considered a large body of water. Depth and form, when the glacial margin retreated at the termination of the last glaciation, the South Basin was much more completely filled with sediment. So in terms of depth and shape of the littoral zone, which is that nearshore area capable of supporting rooted plant growth, the South Basin is very different compared to the North Basin. In terms of the communities, there are several communities that are strictly South Basin communities: town of Busti, village of Lakewood, village of Celeron, town of Ellicott. And then up in the north, there are some strictly North Basin municipalities, town of Chautauqua, village of Mayville, and then the towns of North Harmony and the town of Ellery. They're very, interesting in that they span both basins. So, so it's a wonderful system. And to get to your question of the draw, Chautauqua Lake supports a world-class fishery for a variety of species. We've hosted, we being the lake community, have hosted some world-class fishing events, just as recently as this year. Muskie and bass and others. You'll have to interview our project manager, Taylor West, if he's probably sweating right now, me naming fish species, but, it's a destination for anglers from all over the country and I'd say probably, beyond. In terms of tax base, the property tax base is extremely robust. The statistics can change, but roughly a quarter coming from what equates to about 1% of the land mass in the county. So in terms of, it's a very disproportionate, ratio of land area to the taxing, tax base, which is, critical to think of. In the lake, culturally, ecologically, economically, it's really a hub for our county, but also for the western New York region, and it draws visitors and part-time residents from metropolitan areas like Cleveland and Buffalo and Pittsburgh and beyond. So, it's just such a vital aspect of our life and our livelihood. But, with all those benefits and the scale of the lake, it supports so many uses and so many users that it's very challenging to pinpoint, conditions or status of the lake as a whole. There's no one statistic or one metric, no one measuring stick that can be used because, the fisheries require a certain setting that really allows it to thrive. The recreational boaters and swimmers, water skiers, it requires a certain set of, characteristics to thrive. And then of course the residences and the businesses that exist around the lake. And drinking water. You can't forget too in terms of the natural resource component. That's the thing with a managed system is we got to remember that these are in our case a natural system that's been here for a long time and will continue to be here, for a long time. And the Chautauqua Institution, parts of the town of Chautauqua, they rely on the drinking water, from the lake. So understanding that that's a balance as well when you're looking at uses and management. So.
Part of your mission, and I guess I'll read the mission, Chautauqua Lake and Watershed Management Alliance, working in collaboration with lake and watershed-related organizations, municipalities, and other stakeholders, will promote and facilitate implementation of recommendations from the Chautauqua Lake Watershed Plan and Chautauqua Lake Macrophyte Management Strategy by prioritizing projects, securing funding, and allocating resources. You, by mission, are an implementer of two studies, one being the Chautauqua Lake Watershed Management Plan and the other Chautauqua Lake Macrophyte Management Strategy. Could you talk about those, the history behind those two plans? Because that's seemingly what is driving this quest, this mission that you guys have.
Yeah, those are two very, very important documents that have been generated through a lot of effort at the county level specifically, but also with a lot of broad stakeholder input. So the Watershed Management Plan was finalized in 2010. It sought to really characterize the watershed as a whole, trying to better delineate the differences in the sub-watersheds. There's 14 sub-basins, primary sub-basins that drain to Chautauqua Lake. They do not abide by municipal boundaries, so they cross from town to town or from village to village. And they, so each section of the lake, whether it's an agriculturally driven landscape or more of a developed area, each sub-watershed has its own special circumstances. So obviously the management of those subwatersheds is different as well. The types of projects that one might consider or implement is going to be dictated by the sort of assessment of the problem. The two of the biggest challenges that we face in terms of sort of root causes of a lot of the symptomatic impairments that the lake, parts of the lake can suffer is nutrient loading, so especially phosphorus and nitrogen, which can run off from the landscape from a variety of sources, and then sediment. So sediment being transferred through streams or through stormwater that then settles in the lake and causes, in some cases, navigational issues, loss of depth. Now, it's important to understand that nutrient delivery from a watershed to a lake and sediment delivery from a watershed to a lake, those are very natural and normal things. It's the degree to which they're happening and the rate at which they're happening that as they're being influenced by the existence and the interaction of people with the landscape is really where our focuses lie. So that watershed management plan was a huge undertaking. It involved a lot of effort to characterize the watershed and just try to get a handle around the general problem identification, and then looking at prioritizing potential solutions that would be the right fit for certain municipalities or certain land use types. And that document, while it's 11 years old, going on 12, it still provides a bevy of information in terms of the modeling-based approach to looking at the topography and the land use and how different areas may be contributing nutrients and sediment from the landscape to the lake. So it still serves as a really good primary document, but it was very high level. There were a lot of details, but it was really meant to, when you're trying to characterize 100,000 acres, it's difficult to pinpoint Project X, Project Y, Project Z, which when it comes to implementation, you really have to have a narrower scope in terms of, not just, physically finding a place to work, but the costs that go along with implementing these watershed projects. So, while our mission statement specifically calls out the watershed management plan, we've had progressive work that's been done over the last 12 years and work that's been done prior to the watershed management plan that also serve as a basis for our mission. So while it's one of the two documents named, there are a lot of spin-offs or complementary resources that we also tap into when it comes to identifying projects.
Kind of begs the question, when you do call it out, you have the plan, watershed management plan, is there a kind of a standing committee that sort of revisits that plan to update it, change it, or is it sort of that plan and then we kind of work variations on a theme?
Well, those questions will be better directed to the county of Chautauqua. Dave McCoy is our county watershed.
Actually, this is a good time. You introduce your audience here.
He's our county watershed coordinator. His much of his purview is wrapped in those types of documents. We as an alliance, we use it as a tool. There's, in terms of a committee, the alliance has a watershed management committee, which isn't necessarily tasked with rewriting plans or updating plans, but it is tasked with providing input and facilitating dialogue among stakeholders to try to identify the best watershed projects, given the funding availability, the interest of landowners, the interest of municipalities. Are they flood reduction projects? Are they sediment reduction projects? Are they invasive species projects? There's a never-ending list of possibilities. So really trying to hone in on what the best approach is for the given time and the given resources. That's really where the critical thinking comes into play. And these plans are wonderful, but you got to take them to the next step to really hone in on specific projects. So, not to punt on your question, but the plans are foundational, but there's a lot that can be spun out of them that doesn't necessarily require looking at the entire watershed again. You can focus in on a sub-watershed and maybe take specific steps within that sub-watershed that, as an example, the county led an initiative 4 years later, 2014, where based on information in the watershed management plan, which was the whole Chautauqua Lake watershed, they commissioned a more detailed erosion diagnosis and mitigation study for Goose Creek subwatershed and the Dutch Hollow Creek subwatershed. So there's an example where they took it to the next level, and while they didn't necessarily say the watershed management plan is being reissued, they went ahead and they got a more detailed look at 2 subwatersheds which were identified and prioritized for this next step of work. And those documents those spun out over $1 million in state grants in terms of stream bank stabilization and stream restoration projects. And also Soil and Water Conservation District and the county have undertaken other projects within those watersheds as well. So that's sort of an example of how those things can progress, from.
So if a municipality, well, let me, I should stay with this. We talked about the management plan. Then there's the Chautauqua Lake Macrophyte Management Strategy. Talk a little bit about that history.
Sure. So that document again was led by the county. It was finalized in 2017, and similar to how the watershed management plan sought to look at the big picture and help to prioritize actions and understanding the nature of the system. So too did the Macrophyte management strategy, but for the in-lake side. So the Macrophyte management strategy documented the current characteristics of the lake, which includes the aquatic plant communities, rare, threatened, and endangered species, lake uses, primary lake uses. It really sought to categorize and put into an inventory kind of the current situation, and then identify issues through stakeholder opinion surveys, through the work of consultants, through lake surveys themselves. A lot of mapping. The mapping is really something that was a huge step forward in terms of bringing this stuff into a GIS platform, Geographical Information Systems platform, which is really, I think, the future of how we need to be with lake management, and it's really where things have gone and will continue to go. But the MMS, the Macrophyte Management Strategy, it identifies a variety of alternatives for management, whether it's mechanical harvesting, chemical management of macrophytes, dredging to a degree, although there was some follow-on work that was focused on dredging so the MMS really serves as the basis for a lot of the in-lake decision-making, whereas the watershed management plan will serve as one of the primary foundational tools for watershed-based management. So the 2 documents really, while they're separate and while they were separately pursued, they're very much aligned in terms of the overall vision of understanding how best to manage the watershed and how best to manage the lake, because those 2 systems operate on such different time scales and different geographic scales that you really, while there may be some desire to somehow create a master all-in-one tool, guideline, it really made more sense at the time. And I was not part of that. I was late in the game on the MMS, so I'm certainly speaking from my understanding of the history, not so much an active participation in the history, but you really have to understand, to go deeply enough, you need to spread yourself out, and that's really one of the challenges that we face. Every decision that we as the Alliance make is what's the right balance, what's the right blend of watershed and lake management and research and monitoring to track data and trends in both the watershed and the lake, and really trying to strike that balance and understanding that balance is constantly going to be fluid, in flux. It's what works or what's deemed the right decision in one year may not be what's deemed the right decision in the next year. Trying to adapt, trying to maintain an adaptive approach to be able to pivot or to be able to, you know, sort of redouble efforts in certain avenues that appear to be working or yielding good results. So, you know, so those documents are critical, but they're by no means the only way that we, you know, evaluate or assess or prioritize. So.
Well, you mentioned the term evaluation, and which brings to mind the fact the Alliance doesn't necessarily contract itself to do the work that is part of those, either those plans or ideas. There's municipalities, there's applicants, you're really a funding mechanism, so that you gather funds based on needs and desires and wants, and then there are applicants who come to you, and what's the process? So if somebody wanted to do the Goose Creek stormwater drainage, how does that work? Did the town of Bust-Eyes simply make an application?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's different in every situation, but you hit the nail on the head that especially the municipalities and the county as well, you know, they oftentimes are in the best position to seek New York State funding, especially because New York State likes to work with well-established, trustworthy partners, which the municipalities and the county provide that avenue. They've got staff and resources that really are necessary to take on these large capital projects, because a lot of the grant-funded work, as a grantee, you oftentimes have to outlay for the costs and seek reimbursement, so it's not an insignificant role that a grantee will play. Now, in the watershed, it's challenging because oftentimes the geographic location that a watershed project is most optimal may be on private property or multiple parcels of private property. So there's a lot of facilitation and coordination that's needed to identify good candidate watershed projects. And then organizations like the Chautauqua Watershed Conservancy, you know, they've been a wonderful partner driving these projects, conceptualizing, being out there talking to municipal leaders or to landowners or to engineers. So we really try to tap the whole team when it comes to identifying, you know, specifically a watershed project, because it is such a kind of a multiple step process that any one step, if it falls through, it may cause the entire project to not move forward. So, you know, yes, seeking and securing the funding is one of our main priorities in the case of especially these state grant-funded projects or outside grant-funded projects. But another thing that we do, and we really enjoy it, and I have to commend my coworkers, Taylor and Jay, you know, facilitating the dialogue up front, trying to talk to municipal leaders. You know, sometimes it'll be leaders coming to us and saying, I have this idea, and sometimes it'll be us going outbound and saying, you know, what about this? And it's really a two-way street, and it works great both ways. It's not to say, you know, it's not to say one way or the other what the right approach is. It really varies. It depends on the interests of the communities. It depends on the interests of the landowners. It depends on frankly, the nature of the project too. So yeah, it can be, you know, but the municipalities are key. They're key because oftentimes and anything that requires permits, that's another thing you have to keep in mind is you have to have the right standing for a grantee or just a project implementer to hold a permit. So if it's a lake maintenance activity, riparian rights are critical, and same with stream projects. So you have to understand, you know, in terms of the lake, the municipalities are extremely key because they can you know, exercise riparian rights over a larger scale, whereas stream projects, oftentimes you're working with individual landowners and facilitating those, you know, because those riparian rights are oftentimes much more segmented. So, you know, and then projects without permitting, there's other considerations that you may find a different project delivery mechanism to be the right situation for a given project.
Question. The lake is owned by the New York State.
Yeah, the bottom of the lake is owned by New York State, yeah. With the exception of a small chunk of offshore area from the Chautauqua Institution, which you're the lawyer, so you'll have to tell me exactly how that all works, but yes, for intents and purposes.
It was in,
New York State.
yeah, it was in a grab by Chautauqua's Department of Religion, that's what they did. Yeah. They did that. That's another story. So do you find people asking you, here you are, a not-for-profit, tax-exempt organization, the Chautauqua Lake Alliance, using the short term here, and you gather money up from foundations, from municipalities, all of which kind of funnel through you, and then in turn go out to grantees to work on the watershed, or the lake itself, which is owned by the state. Do you find, do people ask you, like, how come the state doesn't really take more ownership of this? I know they have the DEC permitting, I know that, but, you know, as far as just the state, they own it.
Sure, those comments are shared sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's a very valid question to ask. I think anytime you're looking at a resource, you try to evaluate, you know, roles and responsibilities. So identifying that the state owns, you know, the majority of the area in which you seek to work, you know, I think it's a valid question. Now, I think it's also important to look at the big picture and say, well, let's not sell short the investments that state funding has put into our watershed and our lake over a great many years. You know, things like the Harmful Algal Bloom Initiative in 2018 to initiate an action plan for Chautauqua Lake, the investments that were made in 2020 to deploy a new research-based harmful algal bloom interception system in partnership with the Army Corps of Engineers, the many water quality improvement project grants that have been awarded, several of which, a handful of which are brand new for this year. You know, so I think it's important to understand that when you talk about managing the lake, there's more to it than just one undertaking or two undertakings on a year-to-year basis. That being said, there are state funding streams that have gone to organizations like the Chautauqua Lake Association, which is money going to lake maintenance. The Chautauqua Lake Partnership as well has received state funding in the past. The Alliance, we've received state funding for targeting invasive species. So, you know, so I think drawing a distinction between some of those longer-term investments and some of the more annual recurring maintenance, I think that's probably an important distinction to make. So, you know, again, those questions, the New York State DEC or others at the state, whether it's Office of General Services, you know, they'd be in a much better position to maybe answer that type of question and, you know, and how they make their decisions on allocations or participation in local management actions.
This is January of 2022. In January of 2019, this Turner series started the beginning of talking with each of the individual stakeholders, one at a time, about their objectives and their mission, and we had representatives of that. During that time period, through the initiative of the County of Chautauqua, there was a memorandum of agreement which ultimately found form, and it's called the Chautauqua Lake Weed Management Consensus Strategy, Memorandum of Agreement dated as of May 1st, 2019, and it had a kind of a 3-year life cycle, which got signed by virtually all those people who are your members. Is there one in place now? Has there been something that supplemented this?
Yeah, just to clarify, it was a 2-year life
Okay.
on the MOA. Yes, in early 2021, let me make sure I get that right. It was, these years have run together, but actually early this year, yeah, in early 2021, you confused me with telling me it was 2022, but we're only 4 days in, but.
Well, it is.
The county executive and others at the county led a project to update or to review and to revisit the MOA, which was coming to an end in May of 2021. And a new document was developed and executed by, again, all who were asked to sign. It's known as the Chautauqua Lake Memorandum of Understanding. So that is the document that is currently in effect for the Alliance and many of our member organizations along with the county.
How in reality does that work, so that if somebody has an idea for a project on the lake, which may impact weed management, how does it run itself up the flagpole, and to whom? Does it go through the Alliance, because it's a funding idea, and through that funding source, you being the Alliance, kind of react within this lake management MOA?
Right, so I think it's important to note that the MOU, so the current document that is in effect, the Memorandum of Understanding, it is very different from the MOA. So it removed the framework of tenets. It really sought to focus on the importance, the critical nature of working together and understanding that there are many voices and many stakeholders with different objectives and priorities. And rather than trying to delineate exactly what management strategy should or could occur in different areas, the MOU instead embraced the concept of working together and understanding that we're all going to be stronger by working together towards a common overall objective, which is a healthy Chautauqua Lake and Chautauqua Lake Watershed. But understanding that the means and methods by which those objectives may be sought are going to vary depending on municipality or organizational level vision. So the MOU is very much a document that sort of codifies in a agreement that's important to work together, understand that there will be differences, but trying to target those differences into constructive progress forward. So in terms of vetting specific projects, again, you really have to look at what is the project, what role ultimately does the state play from a regulatory oversight standpoint. So to take the example of herbicide use, that the permitting and use of aquatic herbicides in Chautauqua Lake and water bodies all over the state is controlled by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. So in terms of the decisions on where and when and how different herbicides may be employed on the lake, that decision lies solely with the DEC, and ultimately the decision of seeking the DEC's permission in the form of a permit application, that lies with the riparian rights holders, which are the municipalities. So that's an example where the action is flowing through a certain pathway of decision making. As compared to certain watershed projects, some require permits, some do not. Those that do require permits, they may go through a different but sort of similar pathway of seeking regulatory approval and municipal approval, those sorts of things. When it comes to funding, the Alliance, we've been very, very fortunate. The generosity of our local charitable foundations has been immense. They have entrusted the Alliance with facilitating and coordinating the efforts of Chautauqua Lake and Watershed work and putting their money to use in a way that our board identifies as the highest and best use for that given funding program. So in terms of funding decisions, those decisions that the Alliance makes, our board ultimately drives that. But when it comes to implementing projects, municipalities, organizations themselves, if they're not relying solely on Alliance facilitated funding, the ability to do projects is not, it's not a toll booth by which everyone needs to pass. It's more of if it's a project that can be helped through funding that passes through the Alliance, then we obviously have an important role in the project, but we're not necessarily the decision makers on whether or not a project moves forward.
I think what's telling is that a lot of us in the audience here and others have been involved with foundations and seen how that has worked and how they have generally had enough faith in you as the Alliance to not find on lake decisions or watershed decisions where they used to get individual applications directly. They now are saying, we'll make the grants to you, the Alliance, who in turn will do the processing and vetting to make that decision viable. I mean, they've sort of turned that decision-making over to you guys. I mean, I think that's a feather in your hat.
We've been given a very, very important responsibility now in terms of, we make recommendations to the foundations through a consolidated local funding program. We solicit ideas and proposals from our members. We put it through a very rigorous evaluation process. And ultimately our board puts together a consolidated request that then goes to the foundations that are participating. And if they deem it, appropriate and possible, then we are then granted that funding to implement that plan. So, the ability now to sort of transition from a process that was different in terms of timing, different foundations would have different timetables at which they would solicit proposals, make grants related to the lake and watershed. So the ability to try to bring, not all, but a big chunk of that into a single process, I think has been powerful because, in partnership with our members, we've been able to better coordinate the year's work up front. Having a coordinated plan of work that does include individual and individual organizations' projects. It's not that everyone is necessarily working under the same project header, but to at least be able to see the whole field or much more of the field early on and try to best align resources with need in a given year, that's really lent to a better ability, certainly still trying to improve every year, but a better ability to really set the program for the year at a single point in time.
So, Randall, if we had to do a highlight reel of this past year, 2021 in review, and I know you've presented a somewhat of a outline to other stakeholders, but you had the Chautauqua Lake aquatic data, a lot of data and research generally, GPS programs, Macrophyte surveys, Jefferson Project, SUNY Fredonia, SUNY Oneonta. You want to speak to the Bowling Green? Speak to a little bit of those and maybe what happened, what it was designed to do on the data, especially because you want to know what you're dealing with in order before you can really cope with it. And maybe what you might have learned this past year.
Yeah, absolutely. Our year, 2021, as with so many sort of large-scale scientific initiatives, it's not a day one you collect the data, day two you tell everyone what you learned. So, in April of 2021, we were very fortunate to convene a panel of scientific researchers on the lake that included folks from the Jefferson Project, Bowling Green State University, SUNY Oneonta, SUNY Fredonia, and they came together on Chautauqua's virtual porch platform and presented to the public, anyone who wanted to attend virtually, and it's available on demand to this day, on what was learned in 2020 and what was being planned for 2021, and it was a wonderful way to sort of jump the season off. There's so much going on. The level of data and research that's happening on this lake right now and in the watershed right now is, I think, is unlike anything we've had in the past. There has been a lot of good work done over many, many decades, and one of the important things is as we introduce these new initiatives, we constantly stress that there is a treasure trove of past data and past information that needs to be brought forward to make sure that we're not simply assuming that something wasn't looked at or wasn't done in the past. And also the power of that historical data is so critical because, you know, it just is. It provides that context. It provides that level of understanding that just can't be matched by just looking at today or even, you know, a year from now or 5 years from now. So it's important we get very excited about what's happening now, rightfully so, because it's monumental. I mean, the leadership of the Chautauqua Institution in partnership with the Jefferson Project and the County of Chautauqua, 2021, while I don't have results or findings to share, I really wish I could, although I'm not the right one to do it. It's the groups themselves, and we very much look forward to that soon. But I can tell you that 2020 was amazing in what they were able to report after really just 3 short months of data collection on the lake. And looking ahead to 2021, the deployment of continuous monitoring vertical profilers in the lake, the continuation of roughly biweekly sampling of not just water quality and water, you know, chemistry, but biological assays and very, very, you know, thorough biological and chemical analysis of the lake in a lot of different areas and depths to feed into those computer models that the first generation of which we were able to see in April of 2021. It may seem simple, but, you know, just figuring out how the water is flowing through and within Chautauqua Lake is something that we identified clearly that we did not know enough about, you know, just by seeing what we learned in those few short months. So 2021, the Jefferson Project deployed earlier in the season. They extended their season to, you know, into November. So the amount of lake data that they were able to collect in 2021, the ability to then feed that into their existing models, circulation models, working towards things like food web models and you know, ultimately with the goal of understanding our system to then understand while also understanding our challenges facing that system with the goal ultimately of figuring out, especially from a harmful algal bloom standpoint, what can be done to you know, to manage that and to intervene in something that's, you know, clearly, you know, is and it will continue to be a big challenge for all lake users, not just at Chautauqua Lake, but all over the state and all over the country and all over the world. On top of that, you know, questions about climate change and how, you know, it is and will continue to affect, you know, the systems that we're trying to manage and live within. You know, the institution introducing their new climate change initiative, I think, you know, and again, not mine to speak about, but I want to certainly highlight that marrying of the lake and the overall big picture, I think, is what we all have to do to really get at the issue as a whole, and not just understanding it, you know, for the people who are involved, but being able to then communicate that out to the greater population and the stakeholders, you know, is twofold: just to know and to be informed, but also organizations, our member organizations who are doing work and contemplating projects, sharing that data and interpretation and information out is critical because it helps us and them to make better decisions about what projects they might want to pursue as the Alliance, what projects we, you know, may want to prioritize. So, and the Jefferson Project is huge, and it's you know, it's in the lake, and it's also looking at expanding into the watershed. But the tributary monitoring program is extremely important because it, you know, as we talked about at the very beginning, it's a big lake, and you can't intervene in every place, nor should you. But identifying the subwatersheds or the portions of subwatersheds that are maybe would be most benefited from active management. That's, you know, understanding what's coming out of those tributaries in terms of nutrient nutrient loads really is what's being tracked now, but looking ahead to sediment loads and things like that is really important. So the work that Bowling Green State University is doing in partnership with the Chautauqua Lake Partnership, deploying of sensors to track near real-time phosphorus concentrations and nitrogen concentrations in the lake is really critical. And that's been wonderful because, that's just an example of how these researchers have sought to work together because, there's talks of co-locating, sensors with the vertical profilers and really trying to utilize all the resources that are in play and not having it be, well, that's my sensor and that's my science and that's my sensor and that's my science. It's okay, you have that sensor, I have this. Can we put them together or what can we learn from one another? So that's really where the information's gonna come, is not from any one entity, but from the collective. And then also there's work underway to utilize drones to track harmful algal blooms. There's certainly work that's happened using satellite imagery, so looking at how can we get maybe some more detailed information. And then the good old-fashioned lake monitoring. So folks like Doug and Jane Conroe at the CLA, they've been working for many, many years going out and collecting water samples, feeding into the New York State's CSLAP program, which is the Citizen Science Lake Assessment Program. And that dates back to the 80s for water quality indicators for Chautauqua Lake. So that's sort of that example of remembering that we've got all this data from years past that needs to continue to come forward. And I hope I didn't forget anybody, but and then on the technical side, there's the research and there's the really heavy academic work that's being done to understand the lake system. But also, we're able to introduce, through the generosity of the Chautauqua Region Community Foundation, we were able to deploy GPS sensors to track mechanical harvesting, and also the MobiTrack program. MobiTracks are amphibious lake maintenance vehicles. The town of Chautauqua operates 4 of them. So we've equipped those vehicles with GPS, and we've been logging now since 2020 much of the mechanical management work for both the harvesting and the nearshore program. So finally being able to put on a map what's being done and pairing that with work reports that are being submitted by the operators, is huge, because there's understanding the problem, but then there's also understanding what you're doing to try to address the problem on a year-to-year basis. So using that technology not just in an academic way, but in an applied operational way, I think is a really big step forward that we've been very fortunate to be a part of. So I'll stop there, but I think that in terms of highlight reel, too, just in terms of lake ops, and I'm sure you hate that when I say I'll stop there and I keep talking, but
Welcome to my world.
2021, one of our big tenets of our lake maintenance program, that coordinated program, was the expansion of the MobiTrack program and the joint operations between the MobiTracks operated by the town of Chautauqua and support vessels and supporting operations by the Chautauqua Lake Association. 2020 marked the first time that we had that, and it was isolated to the northern basin, largely to the town of Chautauqua. 2021, we identified an opportunity to expand the fleet, so we made strategic, through the generosity of the foundations, we expanded the MobiTrack fleet, doubled it from 2 to 4. The town of Chautauqua, under the leadership of Don Emhart and his crew, they expanded their operations to the whole lake. And I think that's an example of where that concept that was initiated in 2020, through a lot of hard work of CLA, town of Chautauqua, the municipalities as well, helping with trucking and helping on the shore side of things under certain scenarios. That's to see that program grow and I think really expand its benefit to a larger part of the lake has been really rewarding to see, and we're very hopeful that we'll be able to secure funding in 2022 to continue that program and to continue to improve it too. We've coordinated meetings. We have a lake management committee, but we also have small group meetings among operators to identify ways to increase efficiency, increase effectiveness. So those things are ongoing. So we're very, we're not, we don't want to be stagnant, but we also want to make sure we're allowing these programs that are new to find their feet and to keep getting better. There's a lot of other examples, but I actually will stop there.
Water flow, surprise. I always get this vision that water flows from, Chautauqua institutions somehow to the Chautauqua. And I get a suspicion that somehow in your studies, water underneath the top layers are flowing in different directions. Was that some of your findings?
Well, they're not my findings, but certainly some of the preliminary data that were being communicated by the Jefferson Project folks at that April 2021 Water Quality Panel. Again, initial data, first generation models, circulation models, indicated that there were instances where particle transfer modeling and the data that they were collecting and then feeding into these computer models were suggesting that water flows were not as simple as everything moves from A to B. And given the shape of the lake, the constrictions at the narrows, the wind patterns, observations of those out on the lake, I think that a lot of people probably thought that there was a little more complexity to it, and I think that what we're seeing now bears that out. There are some times when general assumptions are all you need, but in terms of figuring out fate and transport of chemical constituents in the lake, when you think about just the harmful algal blooms are they're amazing in their ability to generate in one place, travel to another, and so trying to track them and trying to figure out those types of problems, and then identify solutions, you got to know how your lake dynamics are functioning, and at depth versus at the surface versus intermediate areas, embayments versus high flow areas. I think it's very, very complicated, and admitting what we don't know, I think is a really healthy first step in trying to figure out, how can we better understand the patient to be able to administer the treatment.
So here we are still in 2022, and when you come back next year at this time in 2023, what do you hope to report will have accomplished this year?
Yeah, looking ahead to 2022, I really see, this will be year 3 or 2.5, call it, of these the confluence of these pretty major research initiatives. So I'm very hopeful that we'll see some big steps in, continuing to try to drive down that uncertainty. You're never going to remove it entirely from a system like this, or any natural system. Uncertainty can never be eliminated. It can only be reduced. So trying to figure out those key data gaps that still exist, and really moving ahead to not just filling those data gaps, but really taking it to the next step of turning that data into more information, and that information ultimately into better decisions. I'm not saying that 3 years is enough, but 3 years is an important, I think, stepping point in terms of really bringing these big brains and big machines and big computers to bear on our Chautauqua Lake. And also, frankly, just the amount of investment this year compared to 2020, it's amazing. Again, the leadership and the initiative and the drive that the Chautauqua Institution has shown, that our local foundations have shown, that the county has shown, and the Alliance, we're just very proud to be part of that. And I think that's going to be a big point, really getting to look at these 2021 data and seeing where the next steps are. Another example is, there's been now 2 years of increased macrophyte monitoring with new groups coming in with research. So North Carolina State University has been engaged on Chautauqua Lake now since 2020. They've got another field season under their belts in 2021. There's an upcoming conference, the Northeastern Aquatic Plant Management Symposium or Society. I can never remember what the S is, but there will be some preliminary results of some of the Chautauqua Lake macrophyte monitoring and management. So that's really from an outside academic institution. So that's really exciting to see. So those sort of incremental building blocks, they can take some time. People get frustrated sometimes with, not seeing immediate reporting of information or saying, okay, study A told us to do action B. It's not often that simple. But seeing those things incrementally come online is great to see. Actually, two research initiatives on Chautauqua Lake are going to be reported on at that conference. So, there was also a new program initiated at SUNY Oneonta, a graduate student coming in looking at toxin exposures through recreation from harmful algal blooms. So that's another exciting step where these research investments are starting to pay dividends. The Habitats program, so the harmful algal bloom interception, treatment and transformation system that was pilot tested by the Army Corps of Engineers and the DEC and their consultant in 2020, they just published a pretty enlightening write-up on that pilot testing and kind of next steps for HAB, treatments. Department of Environmental Conservation, they've been pilot testing a variety of HAB mitigation techniques, Chautauqua Lake included, but also elsewhere in the state, and they just recently were participants in a symposium reporting on some of their findings. So I think there's really a lot on the horizon when it comes especially to the harmful algal bloom side of things that we just want to, I'll speak for myself, but positioning Chautauqua Lake in as strong a position to jump on opportunities for funding or for additional investments, I think that's critical for us, and I think that the legwork that's being done and that has been done is really instrumental in getting us in that strong position. And working together, coordinating activities and efforts as much as possible, dialoguing respectfully, talking about the critical issues openly and directly, but in a way that's constructive. I think the more that we can continue to, stress that, facilitate that, help to make that happen, help to be part of that solution, I think will also be really important in positioning Chautauqua Lake for some huge steps forward in terms of investments in not just the use of the lake and the enjoyability of the lake, but in those core maintenance and management actions that we do critically need. So, that was a lot, and but it's also important to think small too. And I think I'm very, very excited in 2022. We recently received great news that 4 of our members received New York State grants for 2022. There was going to be another inflow and infiltration study up in the North Chautauqua Lake Sewer District where they're continuing to seek issues in their collection system. This one's going to target much of Mayville, which has a quite aged system. So getting those freshwater flows out of those systems is really important because you're no longer carrying those fresh waters to the treatment plant. So you're going to increase your capacity without increasing your capacity, not to mention just leaky sewer pipes are not good for the environment. So, Scott Cummings and that group up there, they have done a ton of work, and we're very happy that they're going to be able to expand their work on not just identifying problems, but fixing those problems. Town of Chautauqua, they received funding for a roadside swale stabilization project, which is going to target over 10,000 linear feet of roadside ditches, which is a big contributor to watershed-based loading of sediments and nutrients, so we'll be happy to be working with them. The Village of Lakewood, they've got a wonderful kind of twofold nutrient and sediment reduction, but also flood mitigation project plan for the Grandview area of their village. They've been working for years on bringing that project through, and we've been really proud to be, part of that with them. And Ball Creek, the town of North Harmony, they're going to be stabilizing some additional stretches of Ball Creek through state funding, and so we're really excited about that. And then, of course, the West Side Sewer Extension, Phase 1 of that, the construction is underway. South and Center Chautauqua Lake Sewer Districts and the county and their contractors and the town of North Harmony. That's going to extend public sewers within the 394 beltway from Bosse's and Asheville all the way up to Tom's Point and Stowe. And that really just leaves the Phase 2 stretch from Tom's Point up to Prendergast Fish Hatchery, which, people have been working very, very hard to secure that funding to get Phase 2 going. But Phase 1 is underway, construction's underway. It's slated to be completed in the next couple of years. So that's going to be huge, coupled with the wastewater treatment plant improvements that were made over the last several years, reducing the phosphorus and nitrogen in the effluents, these I&I collection studies, the septic system investigations that the Department of Health is leading. It's all, those are things that they've been going on for several years, and the dividends they start to pay off immediately, but they really, it's over the long term that those watershed projects pay off. So, if you'll allow it, I'll say that 2022, I look forward to some of the projects that have been implemented in years past continuing to pay dividends, because they're a long-term investment. So, that's another example of, it's not just the, annual project. While those are important, harvesting, managing macrophytes in the lake, possibly dredging, shoreline debris cleanup, that's all very, very important, but it's also important to think about those longer-term projects that are going to continue to pay off year after year. So I'm excited about 2022. I really am. I hope to be invited back. I hope to be in a position to be invited back in the next year. And please know that you know where to find me, and we certainly welcome, as the Alliance, we hold bi-monthly public meetings, both virtually and in person. So we certainly encourage stakeholder participation through our board meetings. They're in the odd-numbered months of the year. It's an ongoing process. We're hopeful to be sharing some big news regarding our local funding program in the coming weeks, which are going to be a big chunk of the work that we hope to be part of in 2022. So, yeah, I can't say thank you enough to those who have come before me, but also on an ongoing funding basis. Again, the generosity of our foundations, the CRCF, the Linné Foundation, the Sheldon Foundation, the Gebbe Foundation, the Holquist Foundation, the Holmberg Foundation. Those dollars are so critical. We continue to try to turn those dollars into more dollars by bringing in state and outside resources, but the year-to-year reliability of that interest in the lake, it just can't be, I don't think enough can be said about how important that is. And the county's investment in the Alliance and the lake and the watershed, that's huge as well. During COVID, thankfully, the investments in the lake were largely maintained. And, I think that was huge because, the lake serves as such a critical resource in times like this, in all times, but certainly in uncertain times for those who came maybe more often or maybe for the first time or stayed when they normally wouldn't stay. So trying to balance the real critical needs out there in the community in terms of health and safety and that with something that to some may seem leisurely and recreational, but it's more than that to this area and to this region. So just a big thank you to our funders, but also to our members and stakeholders who maintained an engagement in times when it was very hard to maintain engagement in a lot of things. So To keep that up in the lake, I think is a really, it's not surprising, but it's still really heartening to see, and I think it continues. And so I just want to take a moment to say thank you to our members and to our funders and to our stakeholders and to our staff, Jay and Taylor. They've done a great job with the Alliance, and our board of directors. They're all volunteers. We have a board of 9. They really represent a wonderful cross-section of leaders across the community, organizations that make up our membership, but also governmental elected officials. The work that they do, I think largely, a lot of the work they do is at our board meetings and behind the scenes, and they certainly do a lot of things in their public-facing jobs as well, but I just want to make sure I take a moment to acknowledge them and thank them for their leadership and their service to the lake. And, the successes that we see in 2021 or 2022, they're not just the results of the work of 2021 or 2022. They're the results of the work for many, many years prior to us. And I just want to, that incremental building, inch by inch, in success, it's important to thank those who came before us and put in, a lot of the hard work that we're now using as a jumping off point for more success. So, I think we got to be very, very aware of that fact, and hopefully that we're doing work now that when somebody better looking with more hair sits here with you, in 30 years, hopefully they'll say the same thing. And I think we got to understand
Did
that
Tanner wave his hand?
So I think it's an interesting time to reflect. So I appreciate you letting me do that. But
I'm glad you have a little enthusiasm about this project. And by the way, coming back next year, just so you know how this works, it's Maureen Ravenio and myself, and the fact that you, in your Village of Lakewood, Chautauqua Avenue, Green Street retrofit project, used a building placement of the Lakewood Apothecary goes an awful long way. I want you to know that.
Well, again, not my project. It was Village of Lakewood. It's been a huge undertaking for them, and we're very proud that project is wrapping up. And but they're jumping right back into it with their next project. So we'll be. I'm going to be Randy Holcomb's worst nightmare for a while. But we're very proud and very appreciative of the work that they've done, and their trustees and their folks there. And they're one of many. We were able to wrap several pretty big projects with the town of Busti has a large swale stabilization project that's coming to a close. The county, we've been working on those stream bank stabilization projects. We were actually able to continue and to use some unspent funding on expanding some of the reaches of Dutch Hollow Creek, and those are wrapping up. Obviously, the Chautauqua Avenue project and several more. But it's really nice to see some of those coming to completion, and with a whole new batch coming online. So we just got to keep moving it forward and trying to match success with success. So
And you've done a lot of that, Randall, and I thank you very much. Randall Perry, thank you for coming.